How are we doing, ladies and gentlemen? Hope you all had a great weekend. Now, as we get closer to May, closer to that May 10th draft lottery date, thanks NBA for scheduling that on Mother's Day. But the reason that date is important, aside from the obvious and that it could potentially be a franchise changing date for the Chicago Bulls should they get lucky and move up into the top 4 of this draft, but it's also important because the Bulls have indicated they would like to have a new GM or executive of basketball operations in place by that date, since we know the draft combine will be happening shortly thereafter. And while we did get a preliminary short list of candidates that we talked about last week, we did get some reporting over the weekend coming from Jake Fisher of the Steinline that initial interviews were conducted virtually, while in-person interviews are going to be scheduled this week with what are believed to be 3 finalists to take over AK's job as head of basketball operations, or the GM. The title itself is insignificant. It's ultimately who is going to be the number 1, who is going to be the lead executive that has the say in the decisions that are going to be made for this team. And those 3 finalists are, again, according to Jake Fisher, are Matt Lloyd, Bryson Graham, and Dennis Lindsey. Now, while I'm not overly excited about any of these options, I'm also not entirely opposed to any of these, with the exception of Bryson Graham, who I talked about before as the guy that I was really the lowest on of all the names that Shams had initially broke, and I'll talk about him in a little bit. But Matt Lloyd and Dennis Lindsey, I can get behind. Either of them would be better than AK based on their history, their resume, and most importantly, their communication and relationship skills, which AK was horrendous at when it came to his interpersonal skills and lack of charisma and command, especially when speaking to the media. But look, all of this being said, I think it's pretty clear this is Matt Lloyd's job to lose. I would be pretty surprised if he does not get this role. He was one of the first names that was linked to the opening when AK and Mark Eversley were first fired, and there are just far too many reasons for why the Bulls would opt to hire this guy over anyone else. And to me, the biggest reason for why Lloyd has the edge and advantage over all these other candidates is that he's familiar to the franchise, familiar to the Reinsdorfs, familiar to John Paxson, who, yes, is having a large role on who the Bulls hire. We know the Bulls love to take the conservative route. Generally speaking, they don't make risky moves, they don't make big aggressive swings, they will go with what's safe, with what's familiar, and Matt Lloyd fits this to a T. As I mentioned in my video last week, Matt Lloyd was with the Bulls franchise for over a decade, from 1999 to 2012, in various roles, starting as a media coordinator, to a scout, to a manager of basketball operations, then was a director of college scouting, until he ultimately resigned in 2012 and then would later become the assistant general manager of the Orlando Magic, a position he actually held for 10 years. Now, his time with the Bulls, primarily working as a scout, was actually, though, encouraging, because from 2003 to 2012, when he held those roles, those were some of the Bulls' best drafting years and talent scouting overall. Kirk Heinrich, one of the most underrated players in this franchise, Ben Gordon, Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, who, yes, the Bulls didn't draft, but they did trade for him on draft night, which was a sign of some of the Bulls' quality scouting to sacrifice their pick in 2005 to be able to get a higher quality player in Luol Deng in 2004. And then, of course, after that, well, you can maybe say, there probably wasn't that much credit for the scouting of Derrick Rose, who really fell into their laps by landing the number 1 pick with a 1.8% chance of getting that pick. But beyond that, some very underrated talent assessment and draft selections like Taj Gibson and Jimmy Butler, who were both late first-round picks. Yes, it's not like Lloyd and Lloyd alone was the sole decision maker in drafting all these guys. That decision primarily was with Gar Forman and John Paxson, but scouts play a large role in identifying who are the best players available in that range, the range that they're going to be selecting. And you can't deny that those were the years where the Bulls continued to hit on their picks season after season. And after 2012, when Matt Lloyd left, that's when things really fell off with their overall draft selections. Marquise Teague, Tony Snell trading the 16th and 19th pick to move up in the draft to get Doug McDermott, Denzel Valentine. I mean, I could go on, but you get the point. There was a clear shift in the Bulls' talent assessment from a draft perspective pre-2012 and post-2012. And it just so happens to coincide when Matt Lloyd left the team. Now, the only thing that concerns me a bit is that Lloyd, when he finally took on a bigger role in a front office with the Magic as the assistant GM, the results were not that great. The Magic, after firing Stan Van Gundy in 2012, went through a lot of bad years and haven't won a playoff series since that time. A lot of weird moves like the trade for Serge Ibaka and giving up on Domantas Sabonis on draft night, trading Victor Oladipo early in his career, a lot of busted draft picks in the lottery. That said, he was still with the Magic when they made that trade for Nikola Vucevic with the Bulls and drafted Franz Wagner. Then, of course, he goes to the Timberwolves as the SVP of basketball operations, then is promoted to GM just 2 years later, serving under Tim Connolly, was the GM when they made that shocking move to trade Karl Anthony Towns, which a lot of people could not understand why they would do that after going to the Western Conference Finals and traded one of their best players. But it ended up working out well for them as the overall fit on that roster has been much more cohesive since then. And of course, what people are now calling the biggest trade of this past NBA trade deadline, the biggest fleecing of this past deadline, making that trade to acquire Ayo Dosunmu, while the Bulls couldn't even get a first-round pick in that exchange. Now, I still think that 4 second-round picks can be somewhat the equivalent of a first-round pick, as we have seen 4 or 5 second-rounders be packaged in a deal for a late first-round pick. And I still think the Bulls got a decent gem in Leonard Miller in that exchange, and who knows, maybe Rob Dillingham will turn into something, anything. But when people are praising the Timberwolves for this trade, and you see how Ayo has been performing and how that move really elevated the ceiling of that team, hats off to the front office for pulling a deal like that off. Which, first of all, shout out to Ayo, man. What an incredible game that was for him the other night to steal game 4 after Anthony Edwards went down, Dante DiVincenzo went down. He comes in, just went in full killer mode for the most he's ever scored in his career, playoff or regular season, on a ridiculous, like, what was it, 95% true shooting percentage. What a moment for him. I mean, bro was getting MVP chants in this game from the home crowd. Just insane to see him really rising to the occasion and seeing him compete at the highest level. Just sucks that it couldn't happen in a Bulls uniform. And the Bulls couldn't figure out how to make something work with all the cap space they're going to have available this offseason to not be able to retain him. Which, by the way, side note, I see a lot of people saying, hey, maybe the Bulls will bring Ayo back. He's going to be a free agent. The Timberwolves, their cap situation isn't the best. They're going to have to get very creative to be able to sign him to a big contract. But I thought under the rules, and the league rules currently, he would have to be traded to another team in order for the Bulls to be able to pick him back up as a free agent in the offseason. Maybe I'm wrong on that, because I have seen some in Bulls media making this claim. I even thought that after the Bulls traded him that it would be funny if they brought him back and basically just rented him out for a few months for those second round picks and Miller and Dillingham, and then got him back in free agency, all just to help with their tanking odds. But yeah, I thought that wasn't a possibility, because teams could try and take advantage of just moving their expiring contracts to get something in return and then re-signing them anyway a few months later in the summer while walking away with some added assets in the process. Either way, I highly doubt that happens. One, because I'm sure after the Wolves have seen what Ayo has been able to do for them in the postseason, they'll do what they can to retain him. But also, you have to think that Ayo, going through this experience of being able to compete, playing in the playoffs, he's not going to choose to come back to Chicago when they're rebuilding as a team. Anyway, all that to say is Matt Lloyd, because of his connections with all the senior leaders in the Bulls organization, because of his experience, his recent success with the Timberwolves, there is no doubt in my mind, in the next week or two, we'll get the Shams bomb that says Matt Lloyd and the Bulls have reached an agreement on a deal for him to become the next head of basketball operations. Now, going back to the two guys, like I mentioned, I wouldn't be opposed to Dennis Lindsey. Of all these candidates, he actually has the most experience in a managerial role, and the only one that actually has experience as the #1 lead role, where he was the EVP of basketball operations for the Jazz for 2 years, from 2019 to 2021, and was the GM before that, dating all the way back to 2012. He was also the GM of the Spurs, GM of the Spurs before that, from 2008 to 2012, which was during the Spurs dynasty days. And even with the Jazz, I mean, being the lead or one of the leads when they drafted Rudy Gobert late in the first round, drafting Donovan Mitchell in the late lottery, putting together some really good Jazz teams who just couldn't get over the hump in the playoffs. So I'm not opposed to Lindsey either, especially now being with the Pistons and completely turning that franchise around since he joined as the SVP of basketball operations in 2024. Now, like I mentioned, the one guy I'm surprised made it as a finalist candidate is Bryson Graham. Yes, it's impressive that he literally went from being an intern all the way to the GM of the New Orleans Pelicans from 2010 to 2024, holding various positions throughout that time until this past season when he took over as the SVP of basketball operations for the Atlanta Hawks. But it's the Pelicans that we're talking about here, a team that has oftentimes been compared to the likes of the Kings and the Bulls as some of the worst run organizations in the NBA. A team that has seemingly gotten good picks, they've had talent over the years and have just gone nowhere. Yes, they've run into their fair share of injuries, but they've also just made some bad trades and signings over the years that leave you scratching your head, even sometimes more than some of the moves the Bulls have made. Now, luckily, he was not the one who made the decision to trade their draft pick in this upcoming year that's unprotected to the Hawks so they could move up to get Derek Queen. But even still, while Graham, his resume, the ladder he's been able to climb has been impressive, the team results, though, throughout that process have been anything but underwhelming. Again, I don't think it's going to matter, though, because Matt Lloyd is ultimately going to get the job. But yeah, if the Bulls did hire Graham, that would probably be the most disappointing one for me, in my opinion. But let me know what you guys think, though. Who do you like among these three finalists? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.